Have you ever found yourself inexplicably fixated on someone's socials, obsessed with something that you don't actually deal with in your tangible life, scrolling without thinking, distracting yourself from the very real things that you need to do? I will let you in on a big secret. Me too. As stinky as it feels to admit, we live in a time where it's easier than ever to be jealous. The good news is that it's not entirely your fault. And if you're anything like me, you're still a big fan of fairy tales, myths, fables, all of that good whimsical stuff. And I think we can learn a lot by taking a second look at Pandora's box. If you're new here, hi, I'm Kate, and this is my series called Cattle Considerations, where I talk about art, culture, the internet. And if you aren't a Greek mythology person, no worries. Let me give you the gist of it. I'm going to explain this all in layman's terms, but I highly recommend you check out the actual source because I'm definitely simplifying a lot of things. But basically, so there's this guy Zeus, right? He is the overlord of the gods. One day, Prometheus decides, hey, I want to steal some fire from humanity without telling Mr. Zeus. And so he steals the fire. Humanity has fire. Woohoo! But guess who finds out? None other than Zeus. Zeus naturally is irritated up the wazoo. And so he devises a plan to give Prometheus a sneaky little gift that is actually not really a gift and is actually a punishment. And this comes in the form of Pandora. Pandora is this beautiful woman who is also accompanied by actually a jar, which is translated as Pandora's box. This jar or box, we'll call it box for the sake of today's purposes, is beautifully adorned, and Pandora takes it to her new home with Prometheus's brother, Epimetheus. They were super creative with the names. To his credit, Zeus does tell Pandora and Epimetheus, do not open this box/jar. But when Epimetheus leaves the house, Pandora gets really curious and opens the box, thus letting out all the evils of the world. These evils are translated in different ways, but some of the most common ones described include sickness, death, sorrow, and envy. All of these things fly out of the box and forever affect humanity. This is where there's a twist in translation. There's one more thing in the box, and in the box is hope. In some translations, hope comes out. In some translations, hope is slammed within the box after Pandora realizes what she's done, and it's just kept in there. And poets tend to disagree on what the meaning or representation of hope is in this case. In the more optimistic reading by M.L. West, hope is seen as the thing that follows all the evils and challenging things of the world, which, you could interpret as, very literally the light at the end of the tunnel. But the more pessimistic reading, which I find very interesting, as interpreted by Friedrich Nietzsche, is that Zeus provided hope at the end of these evils in order to prolong suffering. As said, in its truth, hope is the most evil of evils because it prolongs men's torment. Life is bearable without the continual expectation of everything being perfectly bad, but it still remains flawed. Hi, this is Editing Kate again. I really just have to start thinking faster, but I always have more ideas long after I've recorded the video. But anyway, I feel like a really important point to make about this whole situation is not only in that sometimes more information, at least in a social context, I think can objectively be harmful, but also this idea of hope as a substitute for change, right? This idea that hope can be the placation that prolonged suffering because there's the expectation that something positive will inevitably come. And I think that is a really important distinction that has a lot of parallels with where we are today, especially in terms of conflict and politics and power, and how power is instated and reinstated by divide and belief, and how that belief is manipulated. Anyway, yeah. If I try to bring this back and interpret it to where we are today at this point in time, I would say that the most obvious parallel is that we are constantly tempted to open little boxes, open little jars. We are in a state of mandated surveillance I can't say that word, surveillance with the incentive and pervasive intention to surveil. I know so much about people who I don't know, which I don't think is a good thing. It's hard for us to see the harm in social comparison when we do the act, mainly because, it is something that can have positives. As communal creatures, we're hardwired to take stock and learn from each other. And these are all wonderful things. But unfortunately, the social comparison tools that we have today are, in my opinion, completely overabundant and skew towards the negative because we're not getting an accurate representation of that comparison, because there's just no holistic picture of where everyone is at, because everything is a highlight reel. Yeah. And this brings me to Dunbar's number. So despite us having a lot of flashy little thingies, we're still a little dumb. Our brains can only evolve so much, and this is certainly not at the same rate at which technology has evolved. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar proposed that due to our biological limitations and the faculties for our brain, there is a quote unquote ideal number of people to have within our respective social circles, broken down by levels of vulnerability and interaction. And these numbers are derived from what is called the social brain hypothesis. Obviously, a dramatic simplification, but basically, we're supposed to have 5 people, really. Around 5 people, could be more, could be less, that we can really turn to in a time of crisis or disclose very vulnerable things. The circle becomes bigger as the layers of reciprocal vulnerability go down. We've got 15 people for the sympathy group, which are good friends you feel close to, 50 for the affinity group, which is friends you see regularly, and then the main Dunbar's number is 150 people, which is people you know well enough, you can recognize them, you can say, hey, but beyond that, and this 150 number, these are not close friends. It is theorized that relationships start to become a little unstable. Why? Because we can only handle so much cognitive load when it comes to maintaining relationships, which is very important, but also takes energy. And now you can just imagine how many more sounds and colors and sights we are inundated with on a regular basis, even compared to a decade ago, 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago. And then you can also think about your circle. I think it's fair to say that most people know more of more people overall, but the capacity that you have to maintain relationships does not evolve just because you're exposed and interacting with more folks. I think it just starts to be spread more thin across more parties. And as a result, we feel a little empty inside. So couple that with just think of what you're being exposed to. right? We don't know when we're looking at someone that, maybe they're in a ton of debt. Maybe they had a really rough upbringing and are still suffering like the emotional effects of that. We don't know. Yeah, we just don't know. That's the point, because that is not going to be shared. And so there's the perfection presentation. And then I think the other side of the coin is you're also incentivized, or some creators take the strategy of extreme vulnerability. Exposure and self-disclosure online can lead to profitability, which is kind of perverse, because on the one hand, it might help viewers see a more holistic picture of who you are, and therefore make them feel more connected to you. But like without that reciprocal piece, I don't know what you're really getting other than money and potentially less privacy. Obviously, I commit this to some degree, but I think I've evaluated this more as I've gotten older as to how I relate to the internet. I want to make another video about this, but I also think it's really interesting, this idea of like everyone is becoming a producer or a creator. And when that happens, does an audience exist? Like we're all looking at each other, looking at ourselves. And yeah, okay, so naturally, when we're exposed to all these different things, it's natural to feel jealous if you feel like someone's life is better than yours, or it's leading to more expectations. I will say that jealousy is not always a negative thing. I think it's a natural thing that can help you unpack what your desires are, especially if you figure out that you're jealous because of a trait or aspect or skill that's within your control. For example, you see someone that's very good at something. Maybe that's like a kick in the rear end that you should start learning that thing. However, I think there's only so much reflection we can do when faced with challenging, complex emotions like jealousy. And when we're exposed to things like that, we're quite literally activating our limbic system. We're making ourselves a little upset. So what can we do? Overall, I think it's just really important to have boundaries. Easier said than done, but reflecting on when you take something in, how is it really making you feel after you've consumed something? I don't think you have to feel guilty about curating your feed in a way that protects you. So it's okay to mute people or unfollow folks if it means that you're going to be a happier person. Better yet, be off of it entirely. But I can't even say that because I am on it. So yeah. And I think also just recognizing that the people who make the technology that makes us jealous or makes us triggered in a different way are incredibly smart, and they're doing this with a purpose, right? These companies quite literally prey on our limited biological capacity and design around it. So it creates a feedback loop where we can become triggered by consuming a piece of media, and then we use the same place to try and self-soothe that negative emotion. I feel like a lot of times when I notice myself getting in a crankier hole, I have to like bring out my internal parent to myself and say, hey, you know that this is making you feel negative. It's okay to feel negative things. And, jealousy is natural. It's not a bad thing. But how can we put ourselves in a place where I don't have to open up that box? I don't have to lurk on someone's profile and watch and like surveil, because ultimately what is that doing for me? What is that doing for others when we're only getting a really tiny piece of the picture? Keep your jars closed, keep your boxes closed. Thank you so much for watching. Yeah. I would love to hear your thoughts, because I know for a fact everyone who you're looking at is looking at someone else, and that's just the way it goes. And yeah, I will talk to you later. Bye.